The Force binds all things across the galaxy, connecting every living being in an invisible web of energy and fate. But what happens when something tears through that web, not from within the galaxy, but from beyond time itself? What happens when a man who should have died in one world's history finds himself thrust into another world's future, carrying nothing but a rifle, a knife, and the unbreakable conviction that some fights are worth dying for? The walls of the Alamo were crumbling. Davy Crockett swung old Betsy like a club, the stock connecting with a Mexican soldier's jaw with a sickening crack. His rifle was empty, had been for the last 10 minutes, and there was no time to reload. Blood ran down his buckskin shirt from a dozen wounds, mixing with gunpowder residue and the dust of the mission's collapsing defenses. Around him, the last defenders of the Alamo were falling, one by one, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of Santa Anna's army. "Come on, you sons of bitches," Crockett roared, his Tennessee drawl cutting through the chaos of musket fire and screaming. "I ain't done yet." A bayonet thrust toward his chest. He sidestepped, grabbed the rifle barrel, and drove his Bowie knife up under the soldier's ribs. The man fell, and Crockett stumbled backward, his boot catching on rubble. He was 50 years old, exhausted, bleeding, and he knew with absolute certainty that this was the end. He'd always figured he'd die in bed, old and comfortable, surrounded by grandchildren. Then he'd figured maybe a bear would get him, or he'd fall off a bluff hunting. Never thought it would be like this, backing toward a wall with enemies closing in from all sides, nothing left but defiance and the stubborn refusal to go quiet. "All right then," he muttered, raising old Betsy one more time. "If this is how it ends, let's make it count." A soldier raised his musket, aimed at Crockett's heart. The frontiersman saw the flash of the pan, saw the hammer fall, and in that eternal instant before the ball left the barrel, something impossible happened. The air split. Not with sound, though there was sound, a screaming tear like reality itself was ripping apart, but with light. Blinding, searing white light that swallowed everything. The Alamo, the soldiers, the smoke, the blood. Crockett felt himself falling, tumbling through a space that wasn't space, seeing colors that didn't exist and hearing echoes of battles fought across millennia. He saw stars, impossibly distant stars, and ships that sailed between them. He saw towers of glass and steel reaching toward alien skis. He saw wars that made the Battle of New Orleans look like a schoolyard scuffle. And then he hit ground. Hard. Crockett rolled, old Betsy clutched tight to his chest, and came up in a crouch with his knife drawn. His body screamed protest. Those wounds from the Alamo were still bleeding, but instinct overrode pain. Figure out where you are first, tend wounds second. He was in a desert, that much was familiar. The twin suns beating down from a pale sky, that was decidedly not. "What in the hell?" Crockett breathed, staring up at two burning orbs in the heavens. He'd heard stories from sailors about strange sights in foreign lands, but nobody ever mentioned a place with two suns. His head swam, whether from blood loss or the impossibility of what he was seeing, he couldn't say. The landscape stretched out in all directions, endless dunes of pale sand, rocky outcroppings jutting up like broken teeth, and in the distance, maybe 3 miles off, a cluster of low buildings that looked almost like an adobe settlement. Smoke rose from a few of the structures, and even from here Crockett could see movement, people, or at least things moving like people. He checked himself over quickly. His buckskin shirt was torn and bloodstained, his powder horn was nearly empty, and old Betsy. He examined the rifle carefully. The flintlock mechanism was intact, the barrel wasn't bent, and he had maybe a dozen shots left if he was careful. His Bowie knife was still sharp, still solid. His coonskin cap, miraculously, was still on his head. "Well, Davy," he said to himself, "a habit from years alone on the frontier. You ain't dead. Don't know where you are, but you ain't dead. That's a start." A sound reached his ears, distant at first but growing louder, a mechanical whine that didn't match anything he'd ever heard. Not a steam engine, not a water wheel, nothing natural. He turned toward the source and saw something that made his jaw drop. Flying through the air, maybe 50 feet up, was a machine. A vehicle of some kind, angular and white, with no visible means of propulsion. No propeller, no balloon, no wings. It just hovered there, defying every law of nature Crockett understood. As he watched, it banked toward the settlement, and he caught sight of figures inside. Humanoid shapes in white armor that gleamed in the dual sunlight. "Lord Almighty," Crockett whispered, "where the hell am I?" The flying machine speeder, though he didn't know that word yet, descended toward the settlement. Moments later, he heard sounds that were unmistakable in any language, any world. Screams. Blaster fire, though to Crockett's ears it sounded like nothing so much as concentrated thunder, cracked through the desert air. His body moved before his mind caught up. Years of instinct of running toward danger when decent folk were in trouble overrode the shock and confusion. Crockett checked old Betsy's prime, made sure his powder was dry, and started running toward the settlement. His wounds protested. His 50-year-old legs burned, but he'd run through worse in his time. As he got closer, details emerged. The buildings were made of some kind of hardened clay or concrete, bleached white by the suns. The settlement was small, maybe 40 or 50 structures, built around a central courtyard with a well. And surrounding that courtyard were figures in white armor, holding weapons that glowed at one end and fired bolts of red light. Stormtroopers. Imperial occupation forces conducting a routine taxation raid on Outpost Theta 7, a nowhere settlement on Tatooine that existed only to moisture farm and stay beneath notice. They'd succeeded at the latter until an Imperial supply convoy decided the settlement owed back taxes on water exports. Crockett didn't know any of that. What he saw was soldiers, albeit soldiers in strange armor carrying stranger weapons, terrorizing civilians. He saw a woman clutching 2 children, trying to shield them from an armored figure. He saw an old man on his knees, hands raised in surrender, while another soldier casually aimed his weapon at the man's head. He saw the Alamo all over again. Different place, different time, but the same story. The strong crushing the weak, tyranny grinding freedom under its boot. "Not this time," Crockett growled. "Not if I got anything to say about it." He dropped to one knee behind a rocky outcropping about 100 yards from the settlement's edge, nestled old Betsy against his shoulder and took aim. The frontiersman's eye found his target, the stormtrooper threatening the old man. At this range, with a flintlock rifle, most men couldn't hit a barn door. Davy Crockett wasn't most men. He exhaled slowly, squeezed the trigger, and old Betsy roared. The flintlock's report was deeper, louder than a blaster, a thunderous crack that echoed across the desert. The stormtrooper's helmet snapped back as the .50 caliber ball punched through the plastoid armor like it was paper. The trooper dropped like a puppet with cut strings. For a moment, everything stopped. The stormtroopers froze, heads swiveling, trying to locate the source of this unfamiliar sound. The settlers stared in confusion, and Crockett was already reloading, his hands moving through the familiar ritual: measure powder, ram ball, prime pan. 20 seconds, smooth and practiced. A stormtrooper officer, distinguished by an orange pauldron on his shoulder, pointed toward Crockett's position. Hostile contact, unknown weapon signature, suppress and eliminate. Blaster fire erupted, red bolts slamming into the rocks around Crockett. He ducked, feeling the heat wash over him even though the shots missed by feet. Whatever those weapons were, they hit like concentrated hellfire. "Well," Crockett muttered, bringing old Betsy back up, "at least they shoot straight." He fired again. Another stormtrooper fell, this one clutching his chest where the heavy ball had punched through armor and flesh. The Imperials scattered, seeking cover, their training overriding their confusion. They'd never encountered projectile weapons before. The galaxy had moved beyond such primitive technology millennia ago, but they knew danger when they saw it. Crockett fired a third time, clipping a trooper's arm and sending him spinning. Then he was up and running, using the confusion to close the distance. He knew the fundamental truth of frontier fighting. When you're outnumbered and outgunned, you get in close where their advantages mean less. He covered 50 yards in a sprint that would have impressed men half his age, then dove behind a low wall at the settlement's edge. Blaster fire tracked him, scoring the hardened clay, but he was already moving. Old Betsy barked twice more, and 2 more troopers went down. The settlers were fleeing now, scrambling for their homes, and Crockett was grimly satisfied. Get clear, he thought. Let me handle these boys. Fall back, regroup. The officer's voice was distorted through his helmet comm. Unknown hostile is using primitive kinetic weapons, projectile-based. Adjust tactics. Crockett didn't understand the words. They were speaking basic, the galactic common language, but he understood the tone. They were rattled, good. Rattled men made mistakes. He reloaded behind the wall, then popped up and fired in a different location. Another trooper dropped. The Imperials were returning fire now in coordinated bursts, but they were aiming at where he'd been, not where he was. Crockett moved like a ghost through the settlement, using every bit of cover, firing from unexpected angles, reloading on the move. Old Betsy's powder horn was getting light. He had maybe 5 shots left. Against, he counted quickly, 8 remaining soldiers. Not good odds even for him. One of the stormtroopers got smart, flanking around a building to catch Crockett from the side. The frontiersman saw the movement too late, turned, and found himself staring down the barrel of a blaster rifle at 10 feet. Time seemed to slow. The trooper's finger tightened on the trigger. Crockett hurled his Bowie knife. 18 inches of sharp steel flipped once and buried itself in the narrow gap between the trooper's helmet and chest armor. The soldier made a choked sound and collapsed. Crockett dove forward, yanked the knife free, and grabbed the fallen blaster rifle. He examined it for half a second, trigger, barrel, power pack, and made an educated guess. He aimed at another trooper and pulled the trigger. A bolt of red energy screamed out and caught the stormtrooper's center mass. The soldier flew backward, armor smoking. "Well, I'll be damned," Crockett said, grinning despite everything. "That'll do." What followed was brutal and chaotic. Crockett fought like a cornered mountain lion, switching between old Betsy's remaining shots and the captured blaster, using his knife when enemies got close, and employing every dirty trick he'd learned in 50 years of frontier warfare. He wasn't trained for this kind of combat. Nobody in 1836 was. But warfare was warfare, and killing was killing, no matter what century you were in. When the last stormtrooper fell, Crockett stood in the settlement's courtyard, breathing hard, covered in blood, some his, some theirs, holding a smoking blaster rifle in one hand and old Betsy in the other. The twin suns beat down mercilessly. Settlers emerged slowly from their homes, staring at this impossible figure. A man in primitive clothing with an ancient weapon who just killed an entire Imperial squad. An elderly Rhodian green-skinned with compound eyes approached cautiously. Who are you?" Crockett straightened, wincing at his wounds. He didn't understand the alien's language, but he understood the tone. He tipped his coonskin cap and replied in English, "Name's Crockett, Davy Crockett, and I reckon I just made some powerful enemies." He looked down at the fallen stormtroopers, at their strange armor and strange weapons, and then up at the 2 suns in the alien sky. "But hell," he added quietly, "what else is new? If you want to see more legendary figures enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you." The settlers of Outpost Theta 7 gathered in the courtyard as the twin suns climbed higher, turning the desert air into a shimmering furnace. Crockett sat on the edge of the well, letting a young Twi'lek woman, pale blue skin, head tails wrapped in dusty cloth, tend to his wounds. She worked silently, using some kind of gel that stung like hellfire but seemed to seal the cuts almost immediately. He tried to wave her off at first, but she'd been insistent, and Crockett had learned long ago not to refuse help from determined women. Around him, the bodies of the stormtroopers lay where they'd fallen. The settlers had stripped them of weapons and armor, working with the grim efficiency of people who knew how to make use of every resource. Blaster rifles were being examined, power packs counted, armor pieces assessed for usefulness. It reminded Crockett of frontiersmen stripping a fallen buffalo. Nothing wasted, everything used. The elderly Rhodian who'd first approached him stood nearby, watching Crockett with those unsettling compound eyes. He was speaking in that strange language again, gesturing at the fallen Imperials, then at Crockett, then at old Betsy, which lay across the frontiersman's lap. "I'm sorry, friend," Crockett said, shaking his head. "I don't understand a word you're saying. Wish I did." The Rhodian frowned. At least, Crockett thought it was a frown, hard to tell with that alien face, and turned to confer with a human settler, a weathered man in his 40s with the sun-blasted skin of someone who'd spent his whole life under Tatooine's twin suns. They spoke rapidly, the human occasionally glancing at Crockett, and finally the human approached. "You speak that language?" the man asked in heavily accented but understandable English. His words were halting, like he was pulling them from deep memory. "Old Earth tongue, from before." Crockett sat up straighter, nearly dislodging the Twi'lek who was working on a gash across his shoulder. "You speak English? How in blazes?" "My grandmother," the man said, struggling with each word. "She teach me, old language from human homeworld, ancient history. I never think. I hear someone speak it for real." He looked at Crockett with something approaching awe. "Who are you? How you speak dead language? Where you come from?" Crockett considered his answer carefully. He'd already accepted that wherever he was, it wasn't anywhere close to Tennessee. Hell, it wasn't anywhere on Earth. 2 suns, alien creatures walking around like it was normal, flying machines, and weapons that shot light. He was either dead and in some strange afterlife, or he'd somehow ended up somewhere impossible. "Name's Davy Crockett," he said slowly. "I'm from Tennessee. Was born in 1786, and last I knew it was March of 1836. I was fighting at the Alamo, and then I was here. Don't rightly know how or why." The settler's eyes widened. He turned and spoke rapidly to the Rhodian and the others who'd gathered close. The alien language flew back and forth, basic, though Crockett still didn't know the name, and several settlers pulled out small devices that glowed with soft light. They were speaking into them, and somehow the devices were speaking back. "They using translators," the English-speaking settler explained. "Trying to understand what you say, your words. They make no sense. 1786, 1836. These numbers mean nothing to Galactic Standard Calendar, and Tennessee. No planet by this name in Imperial records." "It's not a planet," Crockett said. "It's a state, part of the United States of America on Earth." More rapid conversation. The Rhodian's eyes seemed to widen impossibly further, and several settlers made gestures that Crockett couldn't interpret. Finally, the human translator spoke again, his voice filled with something between wonder and disbelief. "Earth," he said carefully, "human homeworld is legend, ancient history, so old records are mostly lost. Humans spread across galaxy thousands and thousands of years ago. Nobody know exactly where Earth is anymore. Some say it myth. You say you from Earth, from human homeworld." Crockett felt the world tilt. Thousands of years. Earth a legend. He looked around at the alien faces, at the technology scattered around the courtyard, at the 2 suns in the sky, and felt the full weight of impossibility settle onto his shoulders. "How long?" he asked quietly. "How long since Earth?" The translator consulted his device. "Galactic Standard Calendar is approximately 25,000 years since human diaspora began. Maybe more. Records unclear." 25,000 years. The number was too big to comprehend. Everything he'd known, America, Tennessee, the Alamo, Andrew Jackson, the whole damn world was dust. Ancient history. Legend. He'd somehow been pulled across not just space, but time itself. For a long moment, Crockett sat in silence, staring at his hands. These were the same hands that had pulled a plow behind his father's homestead, the same hands that had loaded old Betsy 1,000 times on hunting trips, the same hands that had shaken Andrew Jackson's hand after the Battle of New Orleans, the same hands that had held his wife Rachel and his children. All gone, long gone, dust on a world nobody even remembered the location of. The Twi'lek woman finished bandaging his wounds and stepped back, speaking softly and basic. The translator listened and nodded. "She say you heal fast, very strong. She never see wounds close so quick with Bacta before." Crockett looked at the gel on his skin, Bacta apparently, and had to admit it was working miracles. The cuts that should have taken weeks to heal were already knitting together. "Tell her I'm grateful, and tell me something. Those soldiers I killed, who were they?" "Imperial Stormtroopers," the translator said, and the reverence in his voice was replaced by fear. "Empire soldiers. They come to collect taxes, but settlement is poor. Cannot pay. They threaten us, hurt people, kill if we resist. Always the same. Empire take, and we have nothing." "The Empire?" Crockett asked. "That the government around these parts?" "Empire is everything," the Rhodian said through the translator's device. "Galactic Empire controls thousands of worlds. Emperor Palpatine rules absolute. His word is law, his forces are everywhere. And you," the Rhodian gestured at the fallen stormtroopers, "you just killed Imperial soldiers. They will send more, many more. They will destroy this settlement as example." Crockett had heard this story before. Different names, different faces, but the same story. A tyrant with too much power crushing anyone who dared resist. Santa Anna had been like that. So had the British before him. Seemed like no matter how far you went, across space or time, there were always men who thought might made right. "How long before they come back?" he asked. The translator consulted with the others. "Maybe one day. Maybe two. Imperial garrison is on other side of planet. When this squad not report in, they will investigate. When they find bodies," he trailed off, the implication clear. Crockett stood, picking up old Betsy and slinging the captured blaster rifle over his shoulder. His wounds still ached, but the Bacta had done its work. He was functional, and functional was all he needed. "Then I reckon we've got work to do," he said. "You folks have any defensible positions, high ground, anywhere you can ford up?" The settlers exchanged confused looks. The translator spoke. "We are moisture farmers, not soldiers. We have no defense. When Empire comes, we hide or we die." "Well, that's about to change," Crockett said firmly. He walked to the edge of the courtyard and surveyed the settlement with a tactical eye. It wasn't much. Scattered buildings, narrow streets, no walls, but he'd worked with worse. The Alamo had been half collapsed when they'd started fortifying it. "Listen up," he called out, and the translator scrambled to keep up. "I don't know much about this galaxy of yours, but I know fighting. I know defending. And I know that running and hiding just means you die tired. You want to survive what's coming, you're going to have to stand and fight." "We cannot fight Empire," a human settler called out. "We have no training, no weapons." "You've got weapons now," Crockett interrupted, pointing at the captured blaster rifles. "And I've got training enough for all of us. Question is, you willing to learn, or you want to wait here for those Imperial boys to come back and make an example of you?" The settlers looked at each other. Fear and desperation warred on their faces. These were farmers, not soldiers. They'd spent their lives trying to stay beneath notice, to survive in the cracks of the Empire's attention. What Crockett was suggesting went against every survival instinct they'd developed. But then a young human woman stepped forward. She couldn't have been more than 20, with dark hair tied back and the calloused hands of hard labor. "My brother was killed by stormtroopers 3 years ago," she said, the translator relaying her words. "He looked at an officer wrong. They shot him in the street and left his body for the desert scavengers. I've been hiding ever since, hiding and hatting." She looked at Crockett with fierce eyes. "Teach me to fight. I'm done hiding." One by one, others stepped forward. The Rhodian elder, a Nikto farmer who'd lost his family to Imperial brutality, a pair of human brothers barely out of adolescence, a scarred Wookiee who'd been a soldier once, before the Empire took everything from him. Not all the settlers volunteered. Some immediately began packing to flee into the desert, but enough stood forward to make a force. 37 souls willing to fight. Crockett looked at them and saw the defenders of the Alamo, outnumbered, outgunned, knowing the odds were impossible, standing anyway because sometimes the fight mattered more than the victory. "All right then," he said. "We've got maybe a day, maybe two. In that time, I'm going to teach you everything I know about holding ground against superior forces. It ain't going to be pretty, and some of you probably won't survive what's coming. But I promise you this, when those Imperial boys come back, they're going to know they were in a fight. They're going to remember this place. And maybe, just maybe, other settlements will hear about what happened here and realize that the Empire can be defied." He paused, looking at each of them in turn. "I already died once defending the Alamo. Didn't work out so well, but I'll be damned if I don't try again. You with me?" The translator relayed his words, and a ragged cheer went up from the assembled settlers. It wasn't much, 37 voices against an empire that spanned the galaxy, but it was something. Crockett spent the rest of the day transforming the settlement into a fortress. He had the settlers pile sand and rubble to create firing positions with clear lines of sight. He identified the strongest buildings and reinforced them with metal scavenged from the Stormtroopers' speeder. He organized the captured weapons, showed the settlers how to aim and fire the blasters, and drilled them on basic squad tactics. The young woman who'd volunteered first, her name was Kira, the translator explained, proved to be a natural. She learned fast, kept her cool under pressure, and had an instinctive understanding of angles and cover. Crockett made her his second in command. "You've done this before," she said through the translator as they worked to fortify the central courtyard. "Different weapons, different enemy, but same principles," Crockett replied. "High ground, clear fields of fire, multiple fallback positions. Make 'em pay for every inch." As the first sun set and the second followed, casting the desert in purple twilight, Crockett stood atop the tallest building and surveyed their work. It wasn't much. Against a full Imperial force, these defenses would maybe buy them an hour, but an hour was more than they'd had before. The translator climbed up to join him, moving carefully on the unfamiliar rooftop. "You know we cannot win," he said quietly. "Probably not," Crockett agreed. "But winning ain't always the point. Sometimes you fight because not fighting means you've already lost something more important than your life." "What is more important than life?" Crockett looked at the man, this stranger from an impossible future, and smiled. "Dignity, honor, the right to say no to tyrants, the knowledge that you stood when it would have been easier to kneel." He gestured at the settlement below, where settlers were practicing with blasters, building barricades, preparing for a battle they'd never trained for. "Look at them. Yesterday they were victims, today they're fighters. That change, that's worth dying for." The translator was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My name is Torin. My family came from core worlds before Empire. We flee here to hide, but you right, hiding is not living, is just slow death." He held out his hand. "Thank you, Davy Crockett, for reminding us we are more than victims." Crockett shook his hand. "Call me Davy, and don't thank me yet. Tomorrow or the next day, hell's coming to this settlement. Let's see if we're all still grateful when the smoke clears." That night, Crockett couldn't sleep. He lay on a bedroll in one of the settlement buildings, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Rachel and the children. Were they mourning him? Had they found his body at the Alamo? Or had he simply vanished, leaving them to wonder what had happened? The not knowing was torture. He'd accepted his death at the Alamo, had made his peace with it. But this, being alive in a place and time where everyone he'd ever loved was dust, this was a different kind of dying. He got up and walked out into the desert night. The stars here were different, constellations he'd never seen, and somewhere among them was Earth, was Tennessee, was home, lost somewhere in the enormity of space and time. "You all right?" a voice asked. Kira stepped out of the shadows, blaster rifle slung over her shoulder. She'd taken to guard duty without being asked. Crockett smiled sadly. "Don't speak your language, girl, but I appreciate the company." She sat down beside him and they watched the stars in silence. Two souls, separated by everything, but united by the simple fact that sometimes you had to stand and fight. The next day passed in a blur of preparation. More settlers joined the defense. Word had spread to nearby moisture farms, and people arrived throughout the day, some to fight, others just to see the crazy human who'd killed an Imperial squad with a primitive rifle. By evening, their force had swelled to 53. Still pathetically small against what was coming, but Crockett had worked miracles with less. The attack came at dawn the second day. Crockett was on watch when he saw the dust cloud on the horizon. He'd been expecting landspeeders, maybe a few more squads of stormtroopers. What he saw made his blood run cold. An Imperial troop transport was coming across the desert, flanked by two ATSD walkers, four-legged machines that stood 3 stories tall, bristling with weapons. Behind them, he counted at least 5 speeder bikes and 2 more transports. God Almighty, Crockett breathed. He'd asked for a fight. The Empire was bringing a war. He raised the alarm and the settlement exploded into action. Defenders rushed to their positions. Weapons were checked and rechecked. And Crockett stood in the center of it all, old Betsy in hand, coonskin cap on his head, looking at an enemy beyond anything he'd ever faced. "Well, boys," he said to the settlers gathered around him, knowing most didn't understand his words but hoping they'd catch his meaning. "This is it. This is what we've been waiting for. They're coming to crush us, to make an example, to prove that the Empire can't be defied." He chambered around in old Betsy, the familiar motion steadying his nerves. "Let's prove him wrong." The Empire came with the rising sun at their backs, silhouettes against the pale morning sky that turned the ATSD walkers into mechanical demons and cast long shadows across the sand. Crockett watched from his position on the tallest building's roof, old Betsy resting against the low parapet wall, his borrowed macrobinoculars, primitive by galactic standards but miraculous to him, pressed to his eyes. Through the lenses, he could count the enemy. 2 ATSD walkers, 6 speeder bikes, 3 Imperial troop transports capable of carrying 20 soldiers each, and what looked like an officer's command speeder hanging back from the formation. 75 stormtroopers, minimum, against his 53 barely trained defenders, most of whom had never fired a blaster before 3 days ago. The odds were worse than the Alamo. At least there, they'd all known how to shoot. "Torin," Crockett called down to the translator who stood in the courtyard below coordinating the defenders. "Tell everyone to hold fire until I take the first shot. We've got one advantage here. They don't know what we're capable of. Let's not waste it." Torin relayed the message through his comlink, another miracle device that let him speak to defenders scattered throughout the settlement. Crockett heard the acknowledgments crackle back, voices tight with fear and determination in equal measure. The Imperial formation slowed as it approached the settlement's outskirts, speeder bikes fanning out in a perimeter while the transports disgorged their troops. Stormtroopers deployed in disciplined formation, their white armor gleaming in the early light. The ATSDs stalked forward with mechanical precision, their head-mounted weapons swiveling as they scanned for threats. From the command speeder emerged an officer in a crisp gray uniform, flanked by 2 stormtroopers in black pauldrons, squad leaders. The officer surveyed the settlement through his own binoculars, and even at this distance, Crockett could read the body language, contempt mixed with cold fury. The officer raised an amplified speaker to his mouth, and his voice boomed across the desert. "Attention, inhabitants of Outpost Theta 7. I am Commander Breck Tanner of the Imperial Garrison. 3 days ago, a full squad under my command was murdered in this settlement. The perpetrators will surrender immediately, or this entire outpost will be razed to the ground. You have 2 minutes to comply." Torin looked up at Crockett, fear naked on his face. Through the translator, he said, "What do we do?" Crockett checked old Betsy one more time, powder dry, flint sharp, ball seated properly, and then looked down at the frightened farmer. "We tell him to go to hell, but politely." I don't understand." "Tell him," Crockett said firmly, "that the people of this settlement are done being victims. Tell him they've got a right to defend themselves against armed thugs, no matter what fancy title those thugs wear. And tell him that if he wants to take this place, he's going to have to come through every last one of us." Torin stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had, but he'd come this far, and Davy Crockett had never backed down from tyranny yet. The translator took a shaky breath, raised his own comlink, and somehow managed to patch it through to the settlement's external speakers, salvaged from the crashed Imperial speeder. His voice, amplified and translated into Basic, rang out across the desert. "The people of Outpost Theta 7 reject Imperial tyranny. We have committed no crime. Your soldiers came to steal from us, to terrorize us, and we defended ourselves. That is our right. If you wish to take this settlement, Commander, you will have to fight for it. We will not surrender. We will not kneel. Not anymore." For a long moment, silence hung over the desert. Then Commander Tanner lowered his speaker, and even without binoculars, Crockett could see the man's face flush with rage. "So be it," the officer's amplified voice snapped. "All units destroy the settlement, kill anyone who resists, level every structure. I want nothing left but rubble and corpses." The ATSDs lurched forward, weapons powering up with a rising whine. The stormtroopers advanced in textbook formation, using their speeder bikes and the walkers as mobile cover. It was professional, efficient, and overwhelming. Crockett settled old Betsy against his shoulder, sighted down the barrel at Commander Tanner's chest, and let out a slow breath. The range was long, nearly 300 yards, but he'd made harder shots. The morning air was still, no wind to account for, just elevation and distance. "All right, you bastard," he murmured. "Let's see if Imperial armor stops a good Tennessee rifle ball." He squeezed the trigger. Old Betsy roared, the familiar percussion slapping against Crockett's shoulder. Downrange, Commander Tanner jerked backward, a red flower blooming on his chest where the heavy lead ball had punched through his uniform and the light body armor beneath. The officer collapsed onto the sand, and for a heartbeat, the entire Imperial formation froze in confusion. That heartbeat was all Crockett's defenders needed. Blaster fire erupted from every fortified position in the settlement. The settlers weren't trained soldiers, but Crockett had taught them the fundamentals. Pick your target, aim center mass, squeeze don't pull, and keep firing until the target drops. Red bolts streaked across the desert, catching stormtroopers in the open. 3 went down in the first volley, then 5 more as the defenders found their rhythm. But the Empire's shock lasted only seconds. Training overrode confusion, and the stormtroopers returned fire with devastating precision. Green bolts, why green when theirs were red? Crockett didn't know, slammed into the settlement's makeshift fortifications. A section of wall exploded in superheated fragments, killing 2 defenders instantly. A Rhodian farmer screamed as a bolt took him in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground. The ATSDs opened up with their chin-mounted blaster cannons, and suddenly hell itself was raining down on the settlement. Massive bolts of energy tore through buildings like tissue paper, each impact throwing up gouts of vaporized stone and metal. One of the fortified positions, a reinforced doorway where 4 defenders had been stationed, simply ceased to exist, replaced by a smoking crater. "Fall back to secondary positions," Crockett roared, knowing most couldn't understand him, but hopping Torin would relay the order. He fired old Betsy again, the ball cracking against an AT-ST's viewport and spiderwebbing the transparasteel but not penetrating. Damnation! He dropped behind the parapet as return fire chewed the rooftop to pieces, grabbed the captured blaster rifle, and started firing back. The weapon bucked in his hands. Each shot a lance of red energy that seemed to draw power from some internal source he didn't understand. He didn't need to understand it. Point, shoot, watch targets fall. Simple mathematics. Below, Kira was leading a squad of defenders in a fighting retreat, laying down covering fire while others fell back to the reinforced central courtyard. She moved like she'd been born to combat, directing fire, calling out targets, keeping her people organized even as the world exploded around them. Crockett felt a fierce pride watching her. 3 days ago she'd been a frightened farmer. Now she was a warrior. An AT-ST stalked into the settlement's outskirts, its massive feet crushing a storage building. Its head swiveled, targeting sensors locking onto a group of defenders. Crockett saw what was about to happen and acted on instinct, standing fully upright despite the fire whipping around him. "Hey," he bellowed, waving his arms. "Up here, you mechanical son of a bitch." The AT-ST's head rotated toward him, sensors acquiring this new threat. Its cannons began to track upward. Crockett aimed his blaster at the walker's viewport and emptied the entire power pack in a sustained burst. Bolt after bolt hammered the armored glass, each impact adding to the spiderweb of cracks his rifle shot had started. On the 8th shot, the viewport shattered. The AT-ST pilot, suddenly exposed, made a fatal mistake. He panicked. The walker lurched sideways, one foot coming down on the unstable edge of a collapsed building. The massive machine teetered, gyroscopes screaming as they tried to compensate, and then it toppled with the inevitability of a falling tree. The walker crashed into the settlement's main street with a thunder that shook the entire outpost. Its head cannon fired wildly as it fell, the bolts tearing into the second AT-ST and crippling one of its legs. That walker stumbled, pilot fighting for control, and a concentrated volley from Kira's squad raked its exposed undercarriage. Something vital ruptured, and the machine erupted in a fireball that sent stormtroopers diving for cover. "Yes," Crockett shouted, pumping his fist. 2 walkers down. The Empire was learning that overwhelming force didn't mean automatic victory. But the Imperials were adapting too. A squad of stormtroopers had worked their way around the settlement's flank, using the chaos as cover. They breached a poorly defended section of the perimeter and poured into the streets, fighting room to room with brutal efficiency. Crockett heard the desperate firefight through his comlink, Torrin's voice shouting warnings, defenders screaming as they were cut down. He reloaded old Betsy, only 5 shots left in his powder horn, and scrambled down from the rooftop. His wounds from the Alamo, barely healed, screamed protest. The Bacta had worked miracles, but miracles had limits. He ignored the pain and ran toward the sound of fighting. He found the Imperial breakthrough in a narrow alley between 2 collapsed buildings. 6 stormtroopers were advancing on 3 defenders, 2 humans and a Nikto, who'd taken cover behind an overturned moisture vaporator. The settlers were pinned, blaster fire chewing the vaporator to pieces, and it was only a matter of seconds before they were overwhelmed. Crockett didn't hesitate. He raised old Betsy and fired, the rifle ball catching the rearmost stormtrooper in the back of the helmet. The trooper pitched forward, and his squadmates spun toward this new threat. Big mistake. The 3 defenders seized the opportunity and opened fire, catching 2 stormtroopers in a crossfire. The remaining 3 Imperials returned fire at Crockett, forcing him to dive behind a pile of rubble. Blaster bolts superheated the air above his head, and he could smell burning stone and his own singed hair. He dropped his captured blaster during the dive. Old Betsy was single-shot and unloaded. He had his Bowie knife and 3 more balls in his powder horn. The stormtroopers were advancing, moving in coordinated bounds, covering each other with professional precision. In 10 seconds, they'd flank his position. In 15, he'd be dead. Crockett made a decision that would have horrified any military tactician. He stood up in full view and started reloading old Betsy. His hands moved with the unconscious grace of 50 years of practice. Measure powder, pour, ram ball, prime pan. The stormtroopers saw him, raised their blasters, fired. And missed. Not because they were bad shots. Stormtroopers were trained from youth to hit targets at this range. But because Crockett was moving. Not running, not diving, just smoothly reloading while walking forward. His body shifting with the practiced economy of a man who'd hunted dangerous game his entire life. Every step put him at a slightly different angle, made the Imperials adjust their aim, turned what should have been an easy kill into a frustrating moving target. He brought old Betsy up, aimed from the hip and fired. The lead ball caught a stormtrooper center mass, and the man went down. The other two hesitated, just for a heartbeat, thrown off by this impossible primitive who fought like something out of ancient history. The three defenders opened fire. Both stormtroopers fell. "You crazy," the Nikto defender shouted at Crockett in accented English, the translator device on his belt struggling to keep up. "You crazy man, you almost died." Crockett grinned, already reloading. "Almost don't count except in horseshoes and hand grenades. Now come on, we've still got about 60 of these boys to send home crying." They fought through the settlement in a running battle, linking up with other defenders, falling back when positions became untenable, counterattacking when opportunities presented. Crockett was everywhere directing fire, dragging wounded to cover, taking impossible shots with old Betsy that dropped stormtroopers with mechanical regularity. The settlers began to rally around him, this strange figure in primitive clothing who fought like a demon and refused to yield an inch without making the Empire pay in blood. By midday, the battle had devolved into a brutal stalemate. The Empire had taken the settlement's outskirts, but at heavy cost. Nearly 30 stormtroopers down, both ATSDs destroyed, and the survivors bogged down in vicious close quarters fighting. The defenders had been pushed back to the central courtyard and the surrounding buildings, but they held that position with desperate ferocity. Crockett stood in the courtyard, shirt soaked with sweat and blood, powder horn nearly empty, coordinating the defense. They'd lost 16 settlers, good people who'd stood when they could have run, and twice that many were wounded. But they were still fighting, still holding, and the Empire was learning that terror tactics meant nothing against people who decided death was preferable to submission. A lull fell over the battle as both sides caught their breath. Through his binoculars, Crockett saw Imperial officers in the distance conferring, calling in reports, requesting reinforcements. He'd bought time, proven the settlement could fight back, but time was running out. "Torin," he called to the translator, who was helping tend the wounded. "Ask the folks with those long-range communicators if they can send a message. Any rebel forces in this sector, anyone who might help." Torin's face was pale. "Even if rebels here, they cannot arrive in time. Reinforcements will come from Imperial garrison in hours, maybe less. We have bought time, Davy, but not enough." Crockett looked at the exhausted, bloodied defenders. At Kira, reloading her blaster with shaking hands. At the Nikto farmer who'd called him crazy, now sporting a back-to-patch over a shoulder wound. At the two young brothers, barely old enough to shave, who'd fought like veterans. "Maybe not," he said quietly, "but we've proven something today. We've proven that the Empire bleeds. We've proven that people can fight back. And sometimes, Torin, that's all you can do, prove that resistance is possible. Let others see it and decide if they've got the courage to follow." Before Torin could respond, a new sound cut through the desert air, the scream of atmospheric engines. Crockett looked up and saw 3 ships dropping through the atmosphere, sleek, angular vessels painted in gray and bearing the Imperial cog. "Fighters," Torin breathed, the color draining from his face. "TIE fighters, they will strafe settlement, kill everyone." Crockett watched the ships circle overhead like predatory birds. He'd seen the Empire's response to defiance now. When ground forces couldn't break you quickly, they burned you from the sky. He thought about Rachel, about his children, about the Alamo and how it had ended, walls breached, friends dying, defiance crushed under overwhelming force. He died there, or should have, defending a mission against an army. Here, at the end of space and time, he was going to die defending a settlement against an empire. History didn't repeat, but damn if it didn't rhyme. Get everyone into the reinforced buildings, he ordered. Anything with a solid roof, tell them to take cover and... He stopped. In the distance, beyond the circling TIE fighters, he saw more ships dropping through the atmosphere. These were different, smaller, more agile, painted in mismatched colors, and they were firing. Green laser bolts, a different shade from the blasters, lanced across the sky and slammed into the TIE fighters. One Imperial ship exploded instantly, another spun out of control, trailing smoke. The third tried to flee, but the newcomers ran it down with ruthless efficiency. 3 Rebel starfighters, a battered X-wing and 2 Y-wings that looked like they'd been held together with spit and prayers, swept over the settlement in a victory roll, then turned their attention to the stormtroopers on the ground. "The rebellion," someone shouted. "The rebellion came." The Imperials on the ground, already battered and demoralized by the fierce resistance, broke when the starfighters began strafing runs. Stormtroopers fled toward their transports, abandoning positions, abandoning wounded, interested only in escape. The rebel fighters harried them across the desert, turning retreat into rout. Within minutes, it was over. The Empire's attack force was scattered or destroyed, and the settlement, battered, burning, but standing, had held. The rebel starfighters circled once more, then set down on the settlement's outskirts. Pilots emerged, and one of them, a Twi'lek woman in a flight suit, approached the courtyard with her hands raised in peaceful greeting. Torin met her at the courtyard entrance, translators working overtime. The conversation was brief, and then Torin turned to Crockett with wonder in his eyes. "She say they monitor Imperial communications. They hear distress calls, hear about settlement defending against full Imperial assault. She say they could not believe it, farmers standing against stormtroopers and winning. They come to help, to see if it true." The Twi'lek pilot approached Crockett directly, studying him with sharp eyes. She spoke in Basic, and the translator relayed. "I am Captain Sira Koss, Rebel Alliance. We've been operating in this sector for 2 years, and in all that time, we've never seen anything like what happened here. You turned farmers into fighters and made the Empire bleed." She paused. "Who are you?" Crockett pulled off his coonskin cap, shot through with blaster burns now, and wiped the sweat and powder residue from his face. "Name's Davy Crockett, ma'am, and I reckon I'm just a man who's getting real tired of watching tyrants push folks around." Captain Koss listened to the translation, then smiled, a fierce, predatory expression. "Well, Davy Crockett, the rebellion could use a man like you, and we need to get you and anyone who fought today off this planet before the Empire sends a Star Destroyer to finish the job." "These people fought because they were tired of living in fear," Crockett said. "You going to leave them to the Empire's revenge?" "We're going to evacuate everyone who wants to leave and give them a chance to keep fighting," Koss replied. "The rebellion needs people with courage. Today you proved these settlers have it in abundance." Crockett looked around the courtyard, at the exhausted defenders, at the wounded being tended by their neighbors, at the bodies of those who'd paid the ultimate price for their defiance. "Then I reckon we've got ourselves a deal," he said. "But first, we honor the dead. These folks earned that much." As the twin suns climbed toward midday, the survivors of Outpost Theta 7 gathered what they could carry and prepared to leave the only home most of them had ever known. They would scatter across the rebellion, carrying with them the story of the day they'd stood against the Empire and won. And Davy Crockett, frontiersman from a dead world, would go with them, carrying old Betsy and the unshakable conviction that tyranny, no matter how vast, could be resisted. The fight was just beginning. The rebel transport ship Steadfast Dawn smelled like recycled air, machine oil, and the particular staleness that came from too many beings living in too little space for too long. Crockett sat in the cargo hold, converted into temporary quarters for the outpost Theta-7 refugees, cleaning old Betsy with a scrap of cloth while the ship made the jump to hyperspace. Around him, 43 settlers tried to find comfort on bare metal floors, their faces still bearing the shock of everything they'd lost and everything they'd survived. They'd left 12 behind, buried in the desert sand under cairns of stone because there hadn't been time for anything more elaborate. Crockett had spoken words over them in English that nobody understood, but Torin had translated, and the sentiment had carried across the language barrier. These folks died free, standing on their feet instead of living on their knees. That means something. That'll always mean something. Now they were traveling through something called hyperspace, space that wasn't quite space, moving faster than light itself, toward a rebel base whose location Captain Koss refused to name until they arrived. Crockett had looked out the viewport once during the jump and immediately regretted it. The swirling blue-white tunnel of hyperspace had made his frontier-born brain rebel against the impossibility of what he was seeing. "Is not natural," Torin had said, sitting beside him now. The translator had become something like a friend over the past days, the only person who could communicate with Crockett in anything resembling his native tongue. Humans not meant to travel this way. Old records say when hyperspace first discovered, many went mad seeing it. Now we used to it, but still, is not natural. "None of this is natural," Crockett replied, running the cloth down old Betsy's barrel. "Flying between stars, weapons that shoot light, whole empires spanning thousands of worlds. Hell, Torin, where I come from, we were just figuring out steam engines. Now I'm on a ship traveling faster than light itself." He paused. "You know what the strangest part is?" "What?" "I'm getting used to it. 3 days ago I was dying at the Alamo. Now I'm cleaning my rifle on a spaceship after helping farmers fight off an evil empire. And it's starting to feel normal." He laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Maybe I'm the one going mad." Captain Koss entered the cargo hold, her head-tails swaying with the ship's subtle motion. She'd changed from her flight suit into practical combat fatigues, and Crockett noticed she kept a blaster pistol on her hip even here, among refugees. Old habits from a dangerous life. She spoke in Basic and Torin translated. "We'll arrive at Firebase Kestel in 4 hours. It's a small rebel outpost on Rannon, a moon in the Dalchan system. Not much, but it's hidden and it's ours. The refugees will be processed there, given new identities if they want them, and offered positions with the rebellion if they choose to continue fighting." "And if they don't want to fight?" Crockett asked. "We have connections with neutral worlds willing to take refugees. Nobody will be forced to stay." Koss studied him with those sharp eyes. "But you're not a refugee, are you? You're something else entirely." Torin translated back and forth as Crockett responded. "Ma'am, I don't rightly know what I am anymore. I know I'm a long way from home, about 25,000 years if I understand right. I know the people I loved are long dead. And I know that in the short time I've been in your galaxy, I've seen tyranny that would make the worst kings and dictators from my time look like amateurs." "The Empire," Koss said, and her voice carried a weight of personal hatred. "Yes, they're very good at tyranny. They've had practice. The Galactic Republic stood for 1,000 generations before Emperor Palpatine corrupted it from within. He engineered a war, manipulated both sides, and used the chaos to crown himself emperor. That was 20 years ago. In 2 decades, he's turned a democracy into a fascist nightmare." Crockett absorbed this. "We had a saying back home, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. Sounds like your republic forgot that." "Many forgot," Koss agreed, "or chose not to see. The Jedi peacekeepers who served the Republic for millennia, they were betrayed and slaughtered. The few who survived are hunted. The Emperor has inquisitors, former Jedi turned to darkness, who hunt down anyone Force-sensitive. Force-sensitive? Crockett asked. He'd heard the term before in passing conversations among the settlers. Koss and Torin exchanged a look, and then Koss spoke at length while Torin translated. The Force is difficult to explain. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us, penetrates us, binds the galaxy together. Some people, very few, can sense it, manipulate it. The Jedi used the Force for knowledge and defense. The Sith, their ancient enemies, used it for power and domination. The Emperor is Sith. Darth Vader, his enforcer, is Sith. They've twisted the Force into a weapon of oppression. Crockett thought about this. So it's like religion or magic. Both? Neither. It's real, measurable. Those who can use it can move objects with their minds, sense danger before it happens, influence the weak-willed. In the hands of someone powerful, Koss trailed off. Let me put it this way. Darth Vader once walked onto a rebel cruiser alone and killed 300 soldiers before anyone could stop him. The Force makes gods of men if they're strong enough. Sounds to me like it makes tyrants of men, Crockett said flatly. Any power that puts one person so far above others, that's just asking for abuse. Koss smiled grimly. The Jedi would have agreed with you. They had strict codes, training, discipline to prevent that abuse. It didn't save them. She stood. Rest while you can. When we reach Firebase Kestal, Rebel Command will want to debrief you. What happened at Outpost Theta 7 is spreading through our communication networks. People are calling it a miracle, a nobody settlement that stood against the Empire and won. It wasn't a miracle, Crockett said. It was just folks deciding they'd had enough of being afraid. In this galaxy, that might be the closest thing to a miracle we have. After Koss left, Kira approached. The young woman who'd been first to volunteer looked different now, harder, older in a way that had nothing to do with age. She'd killed at least 6 stormtroopers during the battle. Crockett had seen her face after the first one. Shock, horror, guilt. By the 6th, there'd been nothing but grim determination. War did that to people, stripped away innocence and left only what was necessary to survive. She sat down across from him and spoke in Basic. Torin started to translate, but she waved him off and pulled out her own translator device, speaking into it and letting it render her words in halting English. "You saved us," the device said in a flat, mechanical voice that didn't match the emotion on her face. "Before you came, we were already dead, just didn't know it yet. You showed us we could fight, could win." "I showed you what you already had inside," Crockett replied, speaking slowly so the translator could catch his words. "Courage ain't something you can teach, girl. It's something you find when you're pushed far enough. All I did was give you a reason to look for it." "What you do now?" Kira asked through the translator. "You stay with Rebellion, fight Empire." Crockett looked at old Betsy, at the rifle that had crossed impossible distances with him. "Don't rightly know. This isn't my fight, isn't my time, isn't my galaxy. But then again, maybe fighting tyranny is always the right fight, no matter when or where you are." He met her eyes. "What about you? You going to keep fighting?" "Yes," Kira said, and there was no hesitation in her voice. "Empire killed my brother, took my home. I have nothing left but this." She touched the blaster rifle beside her. "And I have you to thank for teaching me how to use it." "Don't thank me for that," Crockett said quietly. "Killing changes you, hardens you. I've killed more men in the past week than I did in my whole life before, and every single one of them will be waiting for me when I die. You're young, Kira. You've got time to find another path." "There is no other path," she said simply. "Not while Empire stands, not while people suffer. You taught us that some things worth dying for. I learned lesson well." Before Crockett could respond, the ship shuddered and dropped out of hyperspace. Through the viewport, a gray-green moon swung into view, pockmarked with craters and wreathed in thin clouds. Firebase Kestal was hidden in one of those craters, a collection of prefabricated structures and camouflaged landing pads that would be invisible from orbit. The steadfast dawn descended through atmosphere, buffeted by winds, and settled onto a landing pad with a pneumatic hiss. The cargo ramp lowered, revealing a bustling military base, soldiers in mismatched armor, technicians working on fighters with visible battle damage, and the organized chaos of an insurgency operating on limited resources. Captain Koss led the refugees down the ramp, and rebel personnel immediately moved to help them. Medics for the wounded, quartermasters offering food and water, intelligence officers beginning gentle debriefings. The rebellion ran on information, and every refugee from Imperial territory was a potential intelligence source. A human man in officer's fatigues approached Koss, spoke briefly, then turned to look at Crockett with undisguised curiosity. He was middle-aged, scarred, with the bearing of someone who'd seen too much combat and kept fighting anyway. Major Rame, Koss said, introducing him through Torin's translation. He commands Firebase Kestal. He wants to speak with you. Rame spoke in basic Torin translated, and a conversation began that would last 2 hours. They moved to a briefing room, bare metal walls, holographic projector in the center, uncomfortable chairs, and Rame asked questions. Hundreds of questions. Where was Crockett from? How had he arrived in their galaxy? What were his capabilities, his training, his tactical knowledge? What were flintlock weapons and how did they function? Why had the Imperials been so surprised by them? Could they be manufactured? Were there more where Crockett came from? Crockett answered as honestly as he could, though explaining 1836 America to someone from a galaxy-spanning civilization was like explaining color to a blind man. Rame seemed particularly interested in the concept of guerrilla warfare, irregular forces using mobility and terrain to offset numerical and technological disadvantage. We practice similar tactics, Rame said through Torin, but most of our fighters are former military, trained in conventional warfare and trying to adapt. You're describing something different, warfare as practiced by civilians defending their homes. That's exactly what it is, Crockett confirmed. Where I come from, we had a revolution against the British Empire, farmers and shopkeepers standing against the greatest military in the world. We won because we fought different, ambushes, hit and run, making the enemy come to us on our terms. Sounds like that's what your rebellion needs. Rame leaned back, studying Crockett like he was a puzzle to solve. Command is going to want to meet you. Alliance High Command, the generals and admirals who coordinate rebellion operations galaxy-wide. What happened at Outpost Theta 7? He shook his head. We've lost dozens of outposts to Imperial retaliation. They crush resistance as examples, but you turned it around. You inspired civilians to fight back and win. That's propaganda value we can't ignore. I'm not interested in being propaganda, Crockett said sharply. Neither are most of our heroes, Rame replied. But propaganda wins wars as surely as weapons. If word spreads that a settlement stood against the Empire and survived, that civilians can resist, it changes the equation. Right now, most people in the galaxy are too afraid to resist. They need to see that resistance is possible. Crockett thought about the Alamo, about how its fall had become a rallying cry. Remember the Alamo, how it had inspired Texians to keep fighting, ultimately defeating Santa Anna at San Jacinto. Sometimes defeat could be more powerful than victory if it meant something. But this time he hadn't lost. This time the defenders had lived. That was a different kind of symbol. What do you need from me? He asked finally. Now, rest, recover. Let the medics look at your wounds properly, Rame stood. In a few days, a ship will transport you to our main base. Command will decide how best to use your skills, but Crockett, he paused. The Empire you've seen so far, Stormtroopers and ATSDs, that's nothing. That's the Empire on a lazy day in a backwater sector. When they decide you're a real threat, when Vader or the Emperor himself takes notice, you'll face horrors beyond anything you encountered at that settlement. Well, I've faced horrors before, Crockett said quietly, and I'm still here. For now, Rame said, but this galaxy has ways of breaking even the strongest men. I've seen it happen. Good people, brave people, crushed under the weight of fighting an enemy that controls everything. Don't underestimate the Empire. They've had 20 years to perfect oppression. After the debriefing, Crockett was shown to a small quarters, little more than a bunk, a locker, and a refresher unit, and left alone. He sat on the bunk, old Betsy across his knees, and felt the exhaustion of the past days finally catch up with him. He'd crossed space and time, fought in a battle that shouldn't have been winnable, and now found himself at the heart of a rebellion against a galactic empire. It was absurd, impossible, and yet here he was. He thought about Rachel, about whether she would have wanted this for him, thrown into another war, another fight against tyranny. She'd hated when he went off to fight, hated the danger, but she'd understood. Some men were built for standing against injustice, and Davy Crockett had always been one of them. "Well, Rachel," he said to the empty room, "I hope wherever you are, you can forgive me for this. I know I promised I'd come home, but I reckon that's not possible now. So I'm going to do the next best thing. I'm going to make sure the people in this time and place have the same chance at freedom we fought for back home." He laid old Betsy beside him on the bunk and closed his eyes. Sleep came surprisingly easily, and for the first time since arriving in this impossible galaxy, his dreams weren't of the Alamo's falling walls, but of what might come next. 3 days later, Crockett stood in a briefing room aboard the rebel cruiser Liberty's Hope *, facing a holographic display of the Dalchun system. Major Rame was there, along with Captain Koss and a half-dozen other rebel officers. They'd been planning operations, coordinating strikes, and discussing how to capitalize on the morale boost from Outpost Theta 7. 5 more settlements have resisted Imperial taxation raids in the past 72 hours, an intelligence officer was reporting. 3 successfully repelled the attacks. The other 2 were evacuated by local rebel cells before Imperial reinforcements arrived. Command believes this is a direct result of the Theta 7 incident. People are calling it the Frontier Defiance. Crockett listened through Torin's translation, uncomfortable with being discussed, as if he were a movement rather than a man. "We need to leverage this momentum," another officer said. "Strike while the Empire is still reacting. I propose we send operatives to settlements throughout the Outer Rim, teaching them the tactics Crockett used." "Begging your pardon," Crockett interrupted, "but you can't just teach tactics like they're a recipe. Those settlers fought because they'd been pushed past breaking, because they had someone standing with them willing to take the first shot. You send operatives to settlements that aren't ready, you're just going to get good people killed." The room fell silent. Finally, Rame spoke. "Then what do you suggest?" Crockett stood, walking to the holographic display. He studied the planets and moons floating in miniature, thinking about terrain and logistics and the fundamental problem of asymmetric warfare. "The Empire's strength is that they're everywhere," he said slowly, working through the idea as he spoke. "They've got ships and soldiers and resources we can't match head-on. But their weakness is the same thing. They're spread thin. They can't be strong everywhere at once, so we don't fight them where they're strong. We find the gaps, the places they've left weak because they think nobody will challenge them there. We build strength in those gaps, create pockets of resistance they can't easily crush without pulling forces from somewhere else. And when they do pull those forces, we hit them where they just weaken." He looked around the room at the officers. "You asked what I suggest. I suggest we stop thinking about grand strategies and start thinking about making the Empire's life hell one settlement at a time. Make them afraid to patrol their own territory. Make every backwater outpost a potential ambush. Make them see resistance everywhere they look, even in places we're not. Fear works both ways, and right now, the galaxy's afraid of the Empire. Time to make the Empire a little afraid of the galaxy." The officers exchanged looks. Rame was smiling, a predatory expression that reminded Crockett of wolves spotting prey. "Command is going to love you," Rame said, "or possibly court-martial you for insubordination, but probably love you." "One more thing," Crockett added. Whatever you do, don't make this about me. Don't make me into some kind of hero or legend. The moment you do that, you make it about one man instead of about what that man represents. Make it about the settlements. Make it about farmers and laborers and regular folks deciding they've had enough. That's a story that spreads. That's a story that can't be killed by taking out one person. Too late for that, Captain Koss said, pulling up a datapad. Alliance intelligence has been monitoring Imperial communications. They're already making it about you. They're calling you the Frontier Ghost, a mysterious warrior who appeared from nowhere, uses primitive weapons, and has declared war on the Empire. There's an Imperial bounty on your head, 50,000 credits, dead or alive. Crockett whistled low. That's a fair amount of money, I take it. Enough to buy a small ship and live comfortably for 5 years, Koss confirmed. The Empire doesn't issue bounties that high for people they don't consider serious threats. Congratulations, Davy Crockett. You've officially made the Empire's enemies list. Well, Crockett said, checking old Betsy's action one more time, wouldn't be the first time I've annoyed powerful people, and I doubt it'll be the last. The briefing continued for another hour, covering supply routes, intelligence reports, and potential targets for rebel operations. But Crockett's mind was elsewhere, thinking about the settlements scattered across this impossibly vast galaxy, wondering how many of them were waiting for someone to show them they could fight back. He'd been given a second chance, pulled from death at the Alamo and thrown into a fight that spanned the stars. He didn't know if it was fate, accident, or the will of whatever gods watched over this strange galaxy. But he knew one thing: Davy Crockett's last stand wasn't over yet. It was just beginning. The Imperial Star Destroyer * Inexorable hung in orbit over Tatooine like a dagger poised above a throat. In the ship's command center, a cathedral of gunmetal gray illuminated by the cold glow of tactical displays, Captain Thrawn Vex stood with his hands clasped behind his back, staring at the holographic reconstruction of the Outpost Theta 7 engagement with the intensity of a man studying scripture. He rewound the footage again, watched the primitive kinetic weapons muzzle flash, watched Commander Tanner fall, watched disciplined stormtrooper formations dissolve under fire from barely trained civilians, watched ATSTs, armor designed to withstand concentrated blaster fire, topple like children's toys. "Explain to me," Vex said quietly, his voice carrying the dangerous calm of a predator preparing to strike, how an entire garrison operation was defeated by moisture farmers armed with our own captured weapons, and led by a single individual using technology that predates the founding of the Republic. The junior officer beside him, Lieutenant Maris, recently transferred from the core worlds, shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, initial analysis suggests the hostile designated Frontier Ghost employed unconventional tactics our forces were unprepared for. Projectile weapons, guerrilla warfare, psychological manipulation of the civilian population." "I don't want analysis," Vex interrupted. "I want results. Where is this Frontier Ghost now?" "Unknown, sir. Rebel forces evacuated the settlement before our reinforcements arrived. Intelligence believes they transported refugees and the hostile to a hidden base, location unknown." Vex turned away from the hologram to face his bridge crew. He was a career officer, 15 years in Imperial service, a veteran of suppressing a dozen insurgencies. He'd broken rebellious worlds, crushed pirate syndicates, and maintained order through fear and overwhelming force. The Empire's doctrine was simple: make resistance more costly than submission, and most populations would choose the easy path. But this was different. This wasn't a rebellion crushed. It was a rebellion victorious, and victory, even small victory, was contagious. "How many settlements have resisted Imperial operations since Theta 7? He asked. Lieutenant Maris consulted his datapad, and Vex didn't miss the hesitation before he answered. 17 confirmed incidents in the past standard week, sir. 12 in this sector alone. Most were minor, settlers refusing taxation or conscription, but 3 resulted in casualties to Imperial forces. Show me. The hologram shifted, displaying a sector map studded with red markers. Each one represented an act of defiance that would have been unthinkable a month ago. Vex studied the pattern, seeing the spread of infection. Outpost Theta 7 had been the first pustule. Now the disease was metastasizing. The Rebel Alliance is exploiting this, Vex said. They're using this frontier ghost as propaganda, making him a symbol of resistance. He turned back to the hologram of the battle. We need to respond decisively. Find him. Kill him. Make an example that will remind the galaxy why they fear the Empire. Lord Vader has taken an interest, Mara said carefully. Intelligence reports indicate he's requested all files related to the Theta 7 incident. Vex felt a chill that had nothing to do with the recycled air. Darth Vader, the Emperor's enforcer, a walking nightmare who'd broken entire rebel cells single-handedly. If Vader was getting involved, then we'd better find this primitive before the Dark Lord decides our sector command is insufficiently competent, Vex said. Deploy ISB agents to every rebel sympathetic settlement in the Outer Rim. I want surveillance, informants, and interrogations. Someone knows where the rebels took their refugees. Someone always knows. Yes, sir, and the settlements that have resisted. Vex considered. Standard doctrine would be orbital bombardment, reduce the rebellious settlements to slag as a warning to others. But that was exactly what the rebels would expect, and it would make martyrs of the settlements, fuel for their propaganda machine. Occupation, Vex decided. Heavy occupation. Deploy garrison forces to every settlement that's shown even a hint of resistance, not as punishment, as protection. Sell it as the Empire keeping them safe from rebel agitators. We take away their ability to organize while maintaining the moral high ground. That will require significant troop deployment, sir. We'd be stretching our forces thin. Which is exactly what this frontier ghost wants, Vex said. He's trying to force us to spread out, create vulnerabilities, but we're the Empire. We have resources he can't imagine. Call in reinforcements from neighboring sectors. Request additional Star Destroyers. Show the Outer Rim that resistance doesn't weaken us. It brings the full weight of Imperial might down on their heads. The orders went out, and across the sector, Star Destroyers redeployed. Within days, settlements that had never seen more than a squad of stormtroopers found themselves hosting full companies. Imperial walkers patrolled moisture farms. TIE fighter squadrons conducted training exercises overhead, their screaming engines a constant reminder of the power watching from above. Fear returned to the Outer Rim, and with it submission. But not everywhere. Crockett stood on the observation deck of Liberty's Hope *, watching a convoy of rebel transports load supplies from a hidden supply depot built into an asteroid field. The asteroid belt stretched in all directions, millions of tons of rock and ice tumbling through space in an endless dance. Hidden among them were fuel depots, ammunition stores, and repair facilities that kept the rebellion functioning. Impressive operation, he said to Captain Koss, who joined him at the viewport. You folks have built a whole military out of scraps and stubbornness. That's a decent description of the rebellion, Koss replied through Torrens' translation. The translator had become Crockett's near-constant companion, essential for communication with anyone who didn't speak English. We fight an empire with infinite resources using whatever we can scavenge, steal, or build ourselves. How long you been fighting? Crockett asked. Personally, 5 years. The Alliance as a whole has been organizing for about 3 years, but cells have been resisting the Empire since it was founded. My family was killed when I was 15, collateral damage in an Imperial crackdown on my homeworld. I've been fighting ever since. Crockett heard the weight in her words. He'd known soldiers like her before, people who'd lost everything and channeled that loss into purpose. They made fierce fighters but often struggled with what came after the fighting ended. "You got plans for when you win?" he asked. Koss laughed, a bitter sound. "If we win, you mean? The Empire is too vast, too entrenched. Best we can hope for is to make their tyranny costly enough that they ease their grip. Maybe secure independence for a few systems. Complete victory," she shook her head. "That's a dream for optimists and fools." "I've been both," Crockett said. "And I'll tell you something I learned fighting the British Empire back in my time. Empires fall. Always have, always will. They get too big, too confident, and something comes along that they didn't plan for. Maybe that something is you folks. Maybe it's me. Maybe it's just the galaxy getting tired of being pushed around. But they'll fall." "You really believe that?" "I've got to," Crockett said simply. "Because if I don't believe we can win, what's the point of fighting?" A communication officer approached, spoke rapidly and basic. Koss's expression hardened as she listened, then turned to Crockett. "Intelligence just intercepted Imperial communications. They're deploying garrison forces across the Outer Rim, heavy deployment. Settlements that showed resistance are being occupied. They're calling it protective measures, but it's a crackdown." Crockett felt his jaw tighten. How many settlements? 43 in this sector alone. They're spreading thin to maintain control, but it's working. Reports indicate resistance activities have dropped by 70% in the past week. "They're scared," Crockett said. "Empire's scared that what happened at Theta 7 will spread, so they're crushing it before it can." Scared or not, it's effective. Koss pulled up a tactical display on her datapad, showing the sector map now studded with Imperial garrison markers. "We've lost operational flexibility. Can't move supplies without risking Imperial interception. Can't recruit without infiltrating occupied settlements. The Empire's turning the Outer Rim into a prison." Crockett studied the map, thinking about terrain and logistics and the fundamental problem they faced. The Empire was responding to his tactics by doing exactly what he'd predicted, spreading their forces thin. But they had enough forces that even spread thin, they were overwhelming. "We need to hit them where they're not expecting," he said. "These garrison forces, they're deployed to settlements, right? Protecting valuable targets. Protecting, occupying, intimidating, all of the above." "Then we don't hit the settlements," Crockett said. "We hit their supply lines. Every garrison needs food, fuel, ammunition, replacement parts. That's all got to come from somewhere, probably central depots. We find those supply convoys and cut them off. Force the Empire to choose between keeping their garrisons supplied and keeping their logistics protected." Koss considered this. It would work tactically, but politically. We'd be starving out Imperial garrisons positioned in civilian settlements. The settlers would suffer alongside the Imperials. "Not if we supply the settlements ourselves," Crockett said. "We hit the convoys, take the supplies, and distribute them directly to the people. Show them that the rebellion cares more about their well-being than the Empire does. Turn the Empire's occupation into a liability, their forces eating the settlement's resources while we provide relief." "That's," Koss paused, working through the implications. "That's actually brilliant. It turns their strength into weakness, but it would require significant coordination. Hit multiple convoys simultaneously across the sector, distribute supplies before Imperial reinforcements arrive, maintain operations long enough to make a difference." "Then I reckon we'd better get coordinating," Crockett said. Over the next week, Crockett found himself at the center of planning sessions that would have been unimaginable in his old life. He sat in strategy meetings with rebel officers, contributing frontier tactical knowledge adapted to starship warfare. He helped plan ambush sites for convoy raids, drawing on principles of terrain and timing he'd learned hunting in Tennessee forests. He even, with Torin's patient translation, recorded training hollows that rebel cells could use to teach guerrilla tactics. Kira was there through much of it, having volunteered for active combat duty. She'd proven herself at Theta 7, and the rebellion needed fighters. Crockett tried to talk her out of it. She was 20 years old, her whole life ahead of her, but she was stubborn as an ox and twice as determined. "You taught me to fight," she said through her translator during one planning session. "Now I fight is simple." "It's never simple," Crockett replied. "Every person you kill takes a piece of your soul. Every battle leaves scars that don't show on the body. I don't want that for you." "Too late," Kira said, and her eyes held a hardness that hurt to see. "Scars already there. Now I just make them count for something." The convoy raids launched simultaneously across 6 systems. Rebel strike teams, some in stolen Imperial transports, others in converted civilian vessels, ambushed supply convoys with surgical precision. They hit fast, disabled escort ships, seized cargo, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Crockett led one of the raids personally, commanding a team of 20 rebels aboard an armed freighter called Broken Promise *. Their target was a convoy of 3 Imperial supply haulers escorted by 2 TIE fighters, traveling through the Dalchan system en route to occupied settlements on Ran and sister moons. "Remember," Crockett said through his comlink as their ship dropped out of hyperspace, "we're not here to fight, we're here to steal. Disable, grab what we can, and run. Any shooting should be over in 60 seconds or we've already lost." The convoy appeared ahead, massive bulk haulers with the Imperial cog emblazoned on their hulls. The TIE fighters immediately broke formation, screaming toward Broken Promise with weapons hot. "Now," Crockett ordered. 2 Y-wing bombers dropped out of hyperspace behind the convoy and fired ion torpedoes. The blue-white pulses of electromagnetic energy slammed into the haulers, shorting out their systems and leaving them drifting. The TIE fighters banked hard to engage this new threat, and that's when Broken Promise opened up with turbolaser fire. One TIE exploded instantly. The other tried to evade but caught a burst from the Y-wings and spiraled away trailing fire. "Boarding teams, go," Crockett commanded. Broken Promise closed with the disabled haulers and extended docking tubes. Rebel commandos poured aboard the Imperial ships, moving through corridors with practiced efficiency. They encountered minimal resistance. Hauler crews weren't combat troops, and within minutes had secured the cargo bays. Crockett boarded the lead hauler himself, old Betsy slung across his back. The cargo bay was massive, packed with supply crates marked with Imperial identification codes. Food, medical supplies, fuel cells, equipment, everything a garrison would need to sustain occupation. "Start loading," he ordered. "Everything you can carry. Prioritize medical supplies and food." The rebels worked with desperate speed, knowing every second increased the risk of Imperial reinforcements. Hover pallets loaded with crates floated back across the docking tubes into Broken Promise *S hold. Crockett supervised, making sure nothing was damaged, that the most valuable supplies were prioritized. A rebel commando called out, "We've got crew in a sealed compartment. 20 civilians, prisoners being transported for Imperial labor conscription." Crockett felt rage kindle in his chest. The Empire was enslaving people, shipping them like cargo. "Get them out. Get them to our ship. They're coming with us." "Sir, that's 20 additional bodies we don't have." "I don't care what we don't have," Crockett snapped. "We're not leaving prisoners for the Empire. Move." The prisoners, humans, Twi'leks, even a few Wookiees, emerged from their compartment blinking in the cargo bay lights. They were thin, dirty, wearing prison jumpsuits, but alive. When they saw the rebel insignia, several began to weep. 15 minutes after the engagement began, Broken Promise and the Y-wings jumped to hyperspace, cargo holds packed with stolen supplies and 20 liberated prisoners. The operation was repeated across the sector. 6 convoys hit, 4 successfully raided, hundreds of tons of supplies seized. The rebellion distributed the supplies to occupied settlements through secret networks, showing up in the night to leave crates of food and medicine with notes. The rebellion stands with you. Resist. The Empire's response was predictable: increased convoy security, harsher crackdowns on suspected rebel sympathizers, and a sector-wide bounty increase. The price on Crockett's head jumped to 100,000 credits. But the message had been sent. The rebellion could strike anywhere, take what the Empire thought was secure, and vanish like ghosts. Morale among occupied settlements improved as they realized they weren't forgotten. Imperial garrison forces found themselves resented by the very people they were supposed to protect, eating settlement resources while rebel-supplied food sat in hidden caches. Captain Vex, watching his carefully planned occupation strategy unravel, requested a meeting with Darth Vader. The hologram of Captain Vex flickered in the communication center of Vader's personal Star Destroyer * Devastator. The officer stood at rigid attention, sweat visible on his forehead, despite the holographic medium doing its best to hide such human weakness. "Lord Vader," Vex began, "I've requested this communication to inform you that the situation in the Dalchan sector has escalated beyond standard insurgent activity. The individual designated Frontier Ghost has demonstrated tactical acumen and operational capabilities that suggest." "I am aware of the situation, Captain," Vader's mechanically filtered voice interrupted. The Dark Lord stood in shadow, his black armor reflecting the blue glow of the hologram. "The Emperor himself has taken notice of this. Primitive who humiliates the Empire with antique weapons and irregular tactics. My lord, with respect, I believe this individual represents a significant propaganda threat. His methods inspire resistance that spreads faster than we can suppress." "Your belief is irrelevant," Vader said. "I am taking personal command of the hunt for this Frontier Ghost. You and your forces will continue occupation operations while I locate and eliminate the target. The rebellion makes him a symbol. I will show the galaxy what happens to symbols who defy the Empire." The hologram flickered and died. Vader stood alone in his chamber, feeling through the force for the disturbance this primitive represented. There was something unusual about the signature, not force-sensitive in the traditional sense, but touched by something. A temporal anomaly perhaps, or dimensional displacement. Interesting. Lord Vader had killed Jedi Masters, broken rebel generals, and crushed insurgencies across the galaxy. A primitive warrior with an antique rifle would present no challenge. But he would serve as an excellent example of what happened to those who dared resist the Empire's will. "Admiral Piet," Vader commanded over the ship's internal comm, "set course for the Dalchan sector, maximum speed. I wish to conclude this matter personally." "At once, Lord Vader." The * Devastator turned in space, its massive bulk accelerating toward hyperspace, carrying with it the Empire's most feared enforcer and the promise of death. On Firebase Kestal, Crockett cleaned old Betsy and tried to ignore the feeling he'd been having for the past day. The crawling sensation between his shoulder blades that said something dangerous was coming. He'd felt it before, back at the Alamo, in the hours before the final assault. It was the feeling of being hunted. The warning came at 400 hours, the dead of night on Firebase Kestal, when exhaustion made mistakes easy and vigilance hard. Crockett was awake anyway, unable to sleep, cleaning old Betsy for the third time that day when the base alarm screamed to life. Red emergency lights bathed everything in the color of blood, and through the thin walls of his quarters, he heard the organized chaos of a military base responding to immediate threat. He grabbed his rifle, his Bowie knife, the captured blaster pistol he'd taken to carrying, and ran into the corridor. Rebel soldiers rushed past in various states of readiness, some in full combat gear, others pulling on armor as they moved. Torin appeared from a side corridor, translator device already active. Imperial ships, he shouted over the alarms. They found us. Star Destroyer just pulled out of hyperspace. Sensors read it as the Asterisk Devastator. That's Darth Vader's ship, Captain Koss finished, appearing behind them with her flight helmet tucked under one arm. Her face was pale but composed. He's here for you, Crockett. Intelligence has been tracking his movements. He left the core worlds 3 days ago, and he's been asking about the Frontier Ghost at every Imperial installation. Crockett felt ice settle in his gut. He'd heard enough about Vader in the past weeks to know what this meant. The Emperor's enforcer, a Sith Lord who'd single-handedly slaughtered rebel companies, a dark side Force user who could kill with a thought. How long until they reach us? Crockett asked. They're not just reaching us, they're landing, Major Rame said, striding up with a tactical datapad. Vader's personal shuttle just launched from Asterisk Devastator with a full company of his personal legion, the 501st. Best soldiers the Empire has, loyal to Vader personally. They'll be on the ground in 8 minutes. We evacuate, Koss said immediately. Get everyone to the transports. No time, Rame interrupted. TIE squadrons are already establishing air superiority. They shoot down anything that launches. We're trapped on the ground until we can clear them out, and we can't clear them out because... He gestured at the ceiling, meaning the Star Destroyer overhead. We're outgunned by orders of magnitude. Then we fight, Crockett said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. You said Vader's here for me. Then I'll give him what he came for. Rest of you evacuate while I keep him busy. That's suicide, Koss said flatly. Vader will kill you in seconds. Maybe, Crockett agreed. But maybe I'll last long enough for you folks to get away. And if I don't, he checked old Betsy's prime, the familiar ritual steadying his hands. Well, I've died once already. Reckon the second time can't be worse than the first. There has to be another way, Torrin said desperately. There isn't, Rame said, his voice heavy with the weight of command decisions. Crockett's right. If Vader came personally, he won't leave until the target is dead. We evacuate the base, scatter to secondary locations, and hope the Frontier Ghost takes Vader long enough for us to survive. He looked at Crockett. I'm sorry. This is an impossible ask. I've made a career out of impossible asks, Crockett replied. He turned to Kira, who'd appeared in the crowd of rebels gathering in the corridor. She was in full combat gear, blaster rifle in hand, and he saw the intention on her face before she spoke. No, he said firmly, you're evacuating with the others. I fight with you, Kira said through her translator, her jaw set with stubborn determination. You taught me. I stand with you. This isn't your fight, girl. The hell it isn't, Kira snapped, switching to her broken English so the words would hit harder. You teach me to stand, to fight, to not run. Now you tell me to run? No, I stand with you or I stand alone, but I stand. Crockett looked at her, this young woman who'd lost her brother, her home, her innocence, and found purpose in resistance, and saw himself 20 years ago. Stubborn, principled, too damn determined for his own good. He could order her to leave, but she wouldn't listen. Could forcibly evacuate her, but she'd just come back. All right, he said finally, but you do exactly what I say when I say it. Vader comes for me, not you. Your backup, not front line, understood? Kira nodded, fierce pride in her eyes. Anyone else want to volunteer for certain death? Crockett asked the assembled rebels. Because I'm full up on heroes and could use some sense instead. A scarred Wiki commando stepped forward, then a human sergeant, then 3 more soldiers, veterans all, who'd seen too much Imperial brutality to run when they could fight. By the time the volunteers stopped coming, Crockett had 15 rebels willing to make a stand against Darth Vader. You're all insane, Rame said, but there was respect in his voice. I'll coordinate the evacuation. You buy us whatever time you can, and Crockett, he held out his hand. It's been an honor. Crockett shook it. The honor's mine, Major. Now get your people to safety. We've got a Dark Lord to slow down. The next 6 minutes were organized chaos. Rebels streamed toward the hidden landing pads where transports waited, grabbing what equipment they could carry, helping wounded, evacuating data cores and intelligence. Crockett and his volunteers moved to Firebase Kestel's main entrance, a reinforced blast door that opened onto the crater floor. "Here's how this works," Crockett said, speaking slowly so Torin could translate for those who needed it. "Vader's coming for me. He's got force powers, can move things with his mind, sense danger, all sorts of impossible things. We can't fight that head-on, so we don't. We use terrain, use surprise, use every dirty trick in the book. Make him work for every inch. Make him angry. Angry people make mistakes, even Dark Lords." "How you know this?" the Wiki Commando asked through his translator. "I don't," Crockett admitted. "But I know fighting, and I know that everybody, doesn't matter how powerful, has limits. We just gotta find Vader's." Through the blast door's viewports, they watched the Imperial shuttle descend, a black Lambda-class ship that looked like a predatory bird folding its wings. It settled on the crater floor with repulsor whine, and the boarding ramp lowered with hydraulic hiss. Stormtroopers emerged first, 2 full squads in pristine white armor, moving with the precision of elite soldiers. They established a perimeter, weapons ready, and then stepped aside as their lord descended. Darth Vader was exactly as tall as the stories claimed, his black armor seeming to drink in the moonlight. His cape flowed behind him with no wind to move it, and even at a distance, Crockett could feel something wrong about him, a pressure in the air, a weight that had nothing to do with physical presence. The Dark Lord surveyed the base with his mask's emotionless face, then began walking toward the blast doors with measured, unhurried steps. "He knows we're here," Kira whispered. "Course he does," Crockett said. "Man like that probably knows what we had for breakfast." He raised his voice. "All right, positions. Remember, hit and run, don't stand and fight. And if I give the order to scatter, you scatter. No arguments, no heroics, clear." Murmured acknowledgments. Crockett positioned himself at the center of the defensive line, old Betsy loaded and ready. His volunteers spread out behind makeshift barricades, blasters trained on the approaching figure. Vader stopped 50 feet from the blast doors. His respirator's mechanical breathing was audible even through the reinforced walls, a rhythmic, menacing sound that spoke of sustained life through technology and dark will. "I know you are watching, Primitive," Vader's amplified voice boomed across the crater. "I am Lord Vader, servant of the Emperor, and I have come for you. Surrender now, and your death will be quick. Resist, and I will make you beg for the mercy of oblivion." "Well," Crockett muttered, "he's polite, I'll give him that." He keyed the external speaker system. "Name's Davy Crockett, Lord Vader, and where I come from, we don't surrender to tyrants. You want me, you'll have to come get me." For a long moment, silence. Then Vader raised one gloved hand, and the blast doors, 10 tons of reinforced durasteel, simply tore from their housings. Metal shrieked as the force ripped the doors apart like paper, sending massive chunks flying into the crater. The rebels behind them flinched, and Crockett heard someone whisper a prayer in a language he didn't recognize. "Oh hell," he breathed, then louder fire. 15 blasters opened up simultaneously, red bolts converging on Vader from multiple angles. The Dark Lord didn't dodge, didn't seek cover. He simply raised his hand and the bolts froze in midair, suspended by the force, hanging like deadly fireflies. With a gesture, Vader sent them flying back toward the defenders. Crockett dove behind a barricade as his own fire streaked past his head. 2 rebels weren't fast enough. One took a bolt in the chest, the other in the leg. The wounded man screamed, and his companions dragged him to cover. "Spread out," Crockett shouted. "Don't give him group targets." The rebels scattered as Vader strode through the ruined entrance, stormtroopers flowing in behind him. The 501st moved with textbook precision, laying down covering fire, using their lord's advance as a shield. Crockett aimed old Betsy at a trooper and fired. The rifle ball punched through white armor and the soldier dropped. He was already reloading when Vader's masked face turned toward him. Even across 50 feet through the chaos of battle, Crockett felt the Dark Lord's attention lock onto him like a physical weight. It was the same feeling he'd had before, the certainty of being hunted, magnified 1,000-fold. "There you are," Vader said, and something in his mechanized voice suggested satisfaction. He gestured, and Crockett felt invisible force grip him like a giant's hand. His feet left the ground, old Betsy falling from nerveless fingers as he was lifted into the air. The force crushed in from all sides, not enough to kill, but enough to hurt, to demonstrate absolute helplessness. "Primitive weapon," Vader observed, using the force to lift old Betsy from the ground. "Flintlock mechanism, projectile propulsion via controlled explosion, technology obsolete for millennia, yet you killed an Imperial commander with this." The rifle floated toward Vader's outstretched hand. "Fascinating." Crockett struggled against the invisible grip, but it was like fighting gravity itself. His vision was graying at the edges, pressure building in his skull. Through the haze, he saw Kira breaking cover, raising her blaster toward Vader. "No," he tried to shout, but his lungs couldn't draw breath. Vader casually gestured with his other hand, and Kira flew backward, slamming into a wall with bone-breaking force. She slumped to the ground, unconscious or dead. Crockett couldn't tell. Rage flooded through him, rage at his helplessness, at watching this monster hurt people he'd come to care about, at being lifted like a child's toy. He'd faced death before. He'd faced impossible odds, but he'd always been able to fight back, always had his hands on a weapon and his feet on the ground. This was different. This was being totally, utterly outmatched by power beyond anything physical combat could address. Vader examined old Betsy with what might have been curiosity. "Your weapon is crude. Your tactics are predictable. Your resistance is futile, yet you continue to defy the Empire. Why?" Crockett managed to force words through his constricted throat. "Because tyrants need defying." "Defiance without power is merely noise," Vader said. He snapped the rifle in half with the force, the wood splintering, the metal barrel bending. Pieces fell to the ground. "And now you have nothing." Something broke in Crockett watching old Betsy destroyed. That rifle had been with him for 30 years, had fed his family, had defended his home, had crossed impossible distance with him from one world to another. It was the last physical piece of his old life, and Vader had broken it like kindling. But with that breaking came clarity. He'd been treating this like any other fight. Stay armed, stay mobile, stay alive. But this wasn't a fight. It was an execution, delayed only by Vader's curiosity. The Dark Lord wanted to understand what this primitive represented before crushing him. So maybe understanding was a weapon too. "You know what's funny?" Crockett gasped out. "You think power makes you strong, but power's the easy path. Real strength is standing without it. Real strength is being able to be crushed and standing anyway." "Philosophy," Vader said with contempt. He gestured, and Crockett felt his neck begin to compress, the force choking him, cutting off air. "Will not save you." The world went dark at the edges. Crockett's lungs burned. His vision tunneled. This was it. This was how it ended, not in battle, not defending a position, but dangling in the air like a rag doll while a dark demigod squeezed the life out of him. Then blaster fire erupted from 6 different directions, simultaneously. The Wiki Commando and 4 other rebels had worked their way through Firebase Kestal's maintenance tunnels during the confrontation, emerging behind Vader's position. They opened up at point-blank range, catching the 501st Stormtroopers in a crossfire. 3 troopers went down before they could react. Vader's concentration broke for just an instant as he dealt with this new threat, spinning to deflect blaster bolts with his lightsaber, a crimson blade that appeared in his hand as if summoned from darkness itself. That instant was enough. Crockett dropped from the force grip, hit the ground hard, and rolled. His throat was on fire, his lungs desperate for air, but he forced himself to move. The pieces of old Betsy lay nearby, the shattered stock, the bent barrel. He grabbed the Bowie knife from his belt instead and scrambled for the nearest cover. Behind him, Vader was a whirlwind of death. The lightsaber moved too fast to follow, deflecting blaster bolts back at their sources. One rebel fell, then another. The Wookiee commando tried to retreat and was seized by the Force, lifted, and slammed against a wall with killing force. But the ambush had bought seconds, precious seconds. Crockett used them to reach a weapons locker, punch in the emergency override code Major Rame had given him, and grab what was inside. A thermal detonator, a grenade powerful enough to level this entire section. Vader's masked face turned toward him again, sensing danger. "You would destroy yourself to harm me. Futile, I am." Crockett pulled the pin and threw the detonator at Vader's feet. Yeah, you're strong, I'm weak, tyranny rules. Heard it all before." He dove back behind cover as Vader made a split-second decision. Use the Force to throw the thermal detonator back, or use it to shield himself from the blast. The Dark Lord chose the latter, and the detonator erupted in a ball of superheated plasma that vaporized everything within 15 feet. The shockwave threw Crockett against a wall. His vision swam, ears ringing from the concussion. Through the smoke and flames, he saw Vader still standing, armor scorched, cape burned away, but standing. The Force shield had protected him, but not completely. He was hurt. And more importantly, he was angry. "Enough," Vader snarled, his mechanical voice distorted by damage to his respirator. He raised both hands, and every loose object in the chamber, debris, weapons, bodies lifted into the air. "I have tired of this. Die." The debris flew at Crockett like shrapnel from an explosion, hundreds of pieces of twisted metal and stone moving at lethal velocity. He couldn't dodge, couldn't run. He covered his head with his arms and waited for the impact. A wall of blaster fire intercepted the debris mid-flight, vaporizing the smaller pieces and deflecting the larger. Crockett looked up and saw Kira, alive, bleeding from a head wound but standing, along with 5 other rebels who'd circled back instead of evacuating. They were laying down, suppressing fire, forcing Vader to divert attention to defense. "Get out," Crockett roared at them. "Get out now." "Not without you," Kira shouted back. "You said stand together, so stand." The firefight intensified. Vader deflected blaster bolts with contemptuous ease, but the sheer volume of fire kept him occupied. Stormtroopers were engaging from multiple angles. The base was a chaos of weapons fire, explosions, and desperate last stands. Major Rame's voice crackled over the base-wide comm. "All transports away. Repeat, evacuation complete. Anyone still on base, exfiltrate immediately." They'd done it, bought enough time for the rebels to escape. The mission was complete. Now they just had to survive. "Fall back," Crockett ordered. "Fighting retreat to the maintenance tunnels, move." The rebels retreated in coordinated bounds, half firing while half moved, then switching. It was textbook small unit tactics, and it bought them yards of space from Vader's advance. They reached the tunnel entrance, and Crockett was the last through, turning to fire one last burst from his captured blaster before sealing the blast door. The door exploded inward before it could fully close, and Vader strode through the gap. His respirator was sparking, damaged by the thermal detonator, and his breathing sounded labored. But he was still coming, still inevitable. "Run!" Crockett shouted, and they ran through the maintenance tunnels, narrow passages barely wide enough for one person, lit by emergency lights. Behind them, they heard the screech of metal being torn apart as Vader ripped through obstacles with the Force. They burst out of the tunnels onto Firebase Kestal's secondary landing pad, where a single battered freighter sat with engines hot. Captain Koss stood at the boarding ramp, waving frantically. "Come on," she shouted. "We can't wait much longer." The rebels sprinted for the ship. Crockett was bringing up the rear, making sure everyone got aboard, when Vader emerged from the tunnel entrance behind them. The Dark Lord raised his hand, and Crockett felt the Force grip him again, not crushing this time, just holding, stopping him from reaching the ship. "You have caused enough disruption," Vader said, walking slowly forward. "Your primitive defiance ends here." Crockett struggled against the invisible grip. The freighter's engines were powering up, Koss shouting for him to move, Kira leaning out of the boarding ramp reaching toward him. 10 feet. He was 10 feet from safety and might as well have been 10 miles. "Go," he shouted at them. "Get out of here." "We're not leaving you," Kira screamed. "That's an order," Crockett roared. "Captain Koss, get that ship in the air now." Koss hesitated for one agonized moment, then nodded. The boarding ramp began to close. The freighter lifted off, repulsors kicking up dust, and Crockett watched it rise into the night sky. Watched Kira's face pressed against the viewport, tears streaming. Watched the ship that carried the survivors of his stand against the Empire angle toward atmosphere and freedom. Vader's grip tightened, and Crockett was lifted off his feet again. The Dark Lord approached until they were face to mask, and Crockett could see his own reflection in the black lenses. "You die here," Vader said simply. "Alone. Your resistance forgot, your sacrifice meaningless. The rebellion will scatter without its symbol, and the Empire will endure eternal." Crockett met that eyeless gaze and smiled, a genuine, defiant smile. "You really don't understand, do you? I already died once. At the Alamo, defending folks against a tyrant who thought he was invincible. We lost that fight, got massacred. But you know what happened? The story spread. Remember, the Alamo became a rallying cry. We won the war because people saw that resistance was possible, even in defeat." He felt the Force crushing tighter, ribs creaking, but forced out the last words. "You kill me here, you don't end resistance. You just give them another reason to fight. Every settlement that heard about the frontier ghost, they'll remember. They'll tell their children. And someday, sooner than you think, your empire's going to fall because you taught people they could stand up." "Then I will ensure no one remembers," Vader said coldly. His lightsaber ignited with a snap hiss of crimson energy. "I will erase you so thoroughly that not even legends remain." The blade came up and Crockett closed his eyes. He'd lived a full life, had loved and lost, fought and won, crossed impossible distances and made his stand twice against tyranny. If this was the end, it was an end worth having. The lightsaber descended and stopped. Crockett opened his eyes. Vader's blade hung inches from his throat, frozen. The Dark Lord's respirator was smoking, sparking, failing. The damage from the thermal detonator had been worse than it looked. Vader staggered, his grip on the Force slipping, and Crockett dropped to the ground. "Lord Vader," a stormtrooper officer was running across the landing pad. "Your life support is critical. We need to get you to the medical bay immediately." Vader turned on the officer, raising his hand, and the man lifted off his feet, held by the Force, choking. "I do not require." The Dark Lord's voice was distorted, failing. "Assistance." But his hand was shaking. His breathing was ragged. The officer dropped, gasping, and 2 more stormtroopers approached cautiously with a medical support unit. Vader looked back at Crockett, who'd scrambled to his feet and was backing away slowly. For a moment, the Dark Lord seemed to consider finishing what he'd started, but his respirator gave a stuttering wheeze that suggested time was running out. "This is not finished," Vader said, his voice barely recognizable through the damaged vocoder. "I will hunt you across this galaxy. I will burn every world you touch, and when I find you again, you will beg for death." He allowed the stormtroopers to support him, to guide him back toward his shuttle. But his masked face never turned away from Crockett until he was aboard and the ramp was closing. Crockett stood alone on the landing pad, bruised, battered, his throat marked with force-choke bruises. Watching the Imperial shuttle lift off, watching TIE fighters form up escort, watching the Asterisk Devastator begin its ponderous turn in orbit, preparing to leave the system. He'd survived. Against all odds, against Darth Vader himself, he'd survived. But he'd lost old Betsy, lost more rebels, lost a base, and he'd made the Empire's deadliest enforcer personally invested in killing him. "Well, Davy," he said to himself, his voice hoarse from the choking, "you've really done it this time." In the distance, a lone rebel scout ship dropped out of hyperspace, sent back by Captain Koss to retrieve him once sensors confirmed the Imperials had withdrawn. It landed beside him, the pilot waving urgently. Crockett climbed aboard, body aching, and the ship lifted off into the stars. The fight continued. 3 months after Firebase Kestal, the galaxy had changed in ways both subtle and profound. The story of the frontier ghost stand against Darth Vader spread through rebel networks and beyond, whispered in settlements, coded into transmissions, sung in cantinas where Imperial patrols couldn't hear. The details varied with each telling. Some said Crockett had fought Vader to a standstill, others claimed he'd wounded the Dark Lord, still others insisted he'd escaped through cunning and sacrifice. The truth mattered less than what the story represented, that even the Empire's most feared enforcer could be defied, could be resisted, could be made to retreat. Davy Crockett himself had become something he never sought, a symbol. Major Rame had been right about propaganda's power. 17 more settlements rose in open resistance within the first month. Not all survived their stands, but enough did that the pattern became undeniable. The Outer Rim, once cowed into submission, was awakening to the possibility of freedom. Imperial garrison forces found themselves facing not terrified farmers, but organized resistance cells teaching Crockett's tactics. Hit and run, use terrain, make them pay for every inch, turn their strength into weakness. The man behind the legend worked tirelessly to ensure he remained just a man. Crockett traveled between rebel cells, training fighters, planning operations, always moving before Imperial intelligence could track him. He'd commissioned a new rifle, not a replacement for old Betsy. Nothing could replace her, but a slug-thrower designed by rebel engineers that married frontier mechanics with modern materials. It lacked old Betsy's history, but shared her spirit, proof that old ways still had power in a galaxy that had forgotten them. Kira fought beside him often, having risen to command her own squad. The young woman who'd lost her brother had found a new family among the rebellion's ranks, and her tactical instincts, sharpened by Crockett's training and tempered by real combat, made her one of the Alliance's most effective small-unit commanders. She still carried the translator device, still spoke in broken English when she wanted Crockett to truly hear her, and still refused to back down from fights she believed in. Captain Koss had been promoted to squadron commander, leading starfighter operations that used Crockett's guerrilla principles adapted to space combat. Hit Imperial convoys where they're weakest, vanish before reinforcements arrive, make every patrol wonder if they're flying into an ambush. The tactics were working. Torin had returned to his homeworld, one of the settlements that had successfully resisted Imperial occupation, where he taught others not just Crockett's tactical knowledge but his philosophy, that tyranny's greatest weapon was fear, and fear could be overcome by simple human courage. The translator who'd helped a frontiersman navigate an impossible future was now helping his people navigate a path to freedom. And Darth Vader, the Dark Lord, had recovered from his injuries and immediately resumed hunting the frontier ghost with single-minded obsession. 3 times they'd nearly encountered each other, bases raided just after Crockett departed, ambushes sprung on rebel cells hours after he'd left. The Empire had assigned entire intelligence divisions to tracking one primitive human. It was inefficient. It diverted resources from other operations, and it was exactly what Crockett had intended. Every Star Destroyer chasing him was a Star Destroyer not crushing another world. Every Stormtrooper squad deployed to hunt the frontier ghost was a squad not oppressing civilians. He'd turned himself into bait, and the Empire couldn't resist biting. On a dusty Outer Rim world whose name didn't matter, one of thousands that looked like Tatooine, like Outpost Theta 7, like every other frontier settlement trying to survive under the Empire's boot. Crockett sat outside a moisture farm under twin setting suns. He was older now by 3 months, but decades by experience, bearing scars both visible and not. His coonskin cap was tattered, his buckskin clothes patched with modern materials, his hands calloused from work that never ended. Beside him sat his new rifle and a piece of old Betsy's broken stock that he'd recovered from Firebase Kestel's ruins. He ran his thumb over the familiar wood grain, remembering Tennessee, remembering Rachel, remembering everything he'd lost and everything he'd found. "You thinking about home?" Kira asked, sitting down beside him with 2 ration packs. She handed him one, reconstituted protein that tasted like cardboard but kept you alive. "Always," Crockett admitted. "Don't reckon I'll ever stop, but home ain't a place anymore. It's what I'm fighting for, what we're all fighting for." "Freedom," Kira said simply. "More than that," Crockett replied. "The right to live without fear, the right to stand up when pushed down, the right to say no to tyrants and make it stick." He looked at the setting suns, thinking about all the worlds in this vast galaxy that had forgotten those rights were even possible. "I don't know if we'll win this war. Hell, I don't know if I'll survive to see it end. But I know we've already won something. We've proven resistance is possible. And once people know that, really know it in their bones, no empire can stand forever." "The Empire will send Vader again," Kira said. "And next time maybe we don't get lucky." "The next time we'll fight him again," Crockett said. "And the time after that if necessary. That's the thing about freedom. It's not something you win once and keep forever. It's something you fight for every single day. My people learned that in 1776, and these people are learning it now." They sat in comfortable silence as the suns dipped below the horizon and the stars emerged, millions of them, each one potentially orbited by worlds where people were making the same choice: submit or resist. Crockett had made his choice at the Alamo, and he'd made it again at Outpost Theta 7, and he'd keep making it for as long as breath remained in his body. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, Imperial ships were hunting him. Darth Vader was plotting his destruction. The Emperor himself likely knew his name by now. The weight of an entire galaxy-spanning empire was focused on crushing one stubborn frontiersman who refused to acknowledge when he was beat. Davy Crockett smiled at the thought. He'd faced impossible odds before, and he'd die facing them again. But between then and now, he'd stand. He'd fight. And he'd remind this galaxy that tyranny, no matter how vast its reach or terrible its power, could never truly defeat the human spirit's capacity for defiance. The Alamo had fallen, but its legend inspired victory. Firebase Kestel had fallen, but its story sparked rebellion across 100 worlds. Every defeat that meant something was a victory in disguise. Every stand that refused to break was a crack in tyranny's foundation. And one day, maybe not in his lifetime, maybe not even in Kira's, but someday, those cracks would bring the Empire down. "Come on," he said, standing and picking up his rifle. "We've got work to do. There's a settlement 2 systems over that's asked for training. Figure we can get there by morning if we leave now." "You never rest," Kira said, but she was smiling. "I'll rest when I'm dead," Crockett replied. "Tried it once already, didn't take. Reckon I'm meant to keep fighting." They walked back toward the hidden rebel transport that would carry them to the next settlement, the next fight, the next stand against impossible odds. Behind them, the moisture farm's lights flickered on, ordinary people living ordinary lives under extraordinary oppression. Ahead of them, the stars beckoned with promise and peril in equal measure. Davy Crockett had died defending the Alamo in 1836, but in a galaxy far, far away, in a time impossibly distant from everything he'd known, he'd found his last stand wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. The fight for freedom was eternal, crossing time and space, demanding courage from every generation. And as long as one voice was willing to say no to tyranny, As long as one hand was willing to raise a weapon in defense of the defenseless, as long as one heart remembered that some things were worth dying for, then freedom would endure. The frontier ghost disappeared into the night, leaving only legends behind. But legends, as Crockett had learned twice over, had power that empires could never crush. The last stand continued, and in a galaxy learning to resist, that meant everything. Remember the Alamo, remember Theta 7, remember that tyranny can be defied.